Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trulia, and I hope this to be a low-key recap of Friday night's debate with Dr. Lakatos on the issue of Nicea II and a response to some things from Reason Theology and their response to the debate. It was clearly a big win. You heard from Dr. Lakatos himself that I was formidable in giving the Orthodox case. And you could hear it in the tone of the hosts of Reason Theology, a very different recap that they gave of my debate than Ubi Petrus. There was really no laughing, and they went and got Father Richard Price to try to also not only discredit content from the debate, but specifically from what I could tell, because unlike them, I literally didn't listen to that interview yet. But specifically even my stance on icons, which I have given on that show. Someone gave me a review of that, and I respond to it in time. But long story short, it was a big win. And the reason it was a big win is because it's always easy to win a battle that is on the grounds in which you're prepared for, right? And so this almost sounds like it discredits me as a person, as in, well, you prepared better or something. That's not more my point. Here's what I'm getting at. This was a debate on Nicea II, particularly whether Nicea II taught papal supremacy. And so it's incumbent upon whomever is arguing it to know what Nicea II really was about. And so I purposely made the debate about Nicea II and not about, let's talk about everything that happened for the last 2,000 years. I have to tell you, I like talking about everything that happened for the last 2,000 years. I'd love to have a mug fest where we go down every single rabbit trail. Heck, I've done that before. However, what Orthodoxy's strength is that it actually exists in the details. When one looks at an event in enough detail, the Orthodox ecclesiology, or the Orthodox soteriology, if you're looking at the scriptures, or ecclesiology, if we're looking at an issue of councils, the Orthodox side will always prevail when the details are focused on. So why is Orthodoxy on the back foot when we get into the muckfest, talk about 2,000 years of history? Well, the reason is at least in the West, you're listening to this in English, and so this is very Western. And so in the West, we're in a Protestant society. Roman Catholicism is understood through Protestant lenses, including in scholarship, by the way, which is why Roman Catholic scholarship has followed liberal Protestant scholarship. And so subliminally, people already have an understanding of Protestant issues, even if they're really not Protestant or even religious for that matter. And subliminally, they already have an understanding of Roman Catholic issues, because Protestantism was a response to Roman Catholicism. And so when someone speaks about a pope and infallibility and supremacy, even if you weren't even religious and really fully understood these things, there'd be on the subliminal level something that in that story arc, if someone starts drawing a picture, that you would more immediately recognize than some sort of idea that's very foreign to you. So obviously, when Western people interact with Orthodoxy is really foreign to the West. It's very small in the West, YouTube notwithstanding. It's more of a Ron Paul effect in YouTube. We're bigger on the internet than we are in reality in the West. And so when someone makes the big picture argument, it has this subtle appeal because subliminally people already sort of expect it. It's accessible. While the Orthodox argument exists in the details, because you actually have to reorient what you think you know in order to look at something that's centuries old, more than millennia old, and really even start beginning to understand it, especially when it's in another language and it's from another culture, from people that have been dead forever, right, at this point. And so when Orthodox goes into debate and it's just a mugfest, it actually concedes a lot of ground to Roman Catholics, because that is their battlefield, is just what people vaguely know about religion and history, right? Because it's general cultural knowledge, all right? But when someone gets into details, And always the details don't correspond with these general recollections. Um, that then, when that occurs, what happens is the whole story arc falls apart. And when the whole story arc falls apart, they're kind of left holding the bag and don't know what to say. And that's precisely what happened to Dr. Lukatis. He argued his position as admirably and as well as he possibly could have. No one on the Reason Theology crew could have done it better. And that's why their response was very subdued, and I wasn't laughing, because they heard someone go up there, say everything they wanted to say in a calm and measured way, as professionally as possible. And it came out just hollow and irrelevant because it didn't respond to the specific issues in Nicea 2. The facts were on the Orthodox side. So it's not obviously down of a genius, far from it. It's that I presented facts. And then whenever tangents were said, well, how about this? How about that? I said, these are all good. And let's have a show about those things where we could give in detail what really happened in each of those events as it deserves. But if you cannot demonstrate what you said happened in Nicea 2 is really occurred, then on what basis do we trust that your analysis of all these other random events is even relevant? So it undercuts everything. And so any Orthodox debater could simply just understand the given topic in enough detail, force the person to actually talk about that topic, not get into the story arc. And that's why I don't mind saying this publicly. It's not a secret thing. I could tell you this is exactly what I'm going to do. Come onto my battlefield. Let's actually talk about the topic in detail. You're going to lose because the truth's not on your side. And so it was tough for me because I'm generally a curious person. I want to get into all those other details, but you can't in a debate. And especially when you want the truth to be extremely evident to people. And so that's why this debate was received well by both Orthodox and Roman Catholics, because the content was there for the Orthodox side, and the story arc on the Roman Catholic side was exposed for what it was, kind of hollow, right? Very thin facade that cracks very easily. Now, as I do this, we're going to have some fun with this. So I'll put some comments up here. Mefrin Christmas, Merry Christmas says, Eric made a comment in the live chat that you and Ubi frame a structure of the Catholic government that is catered for your weapons against it. And he said this on RT Saturday. And I guess it's sort of true. I just said that. That's what happened, right? But the difference is, right, I wasn't being disingenuous. I was like, let's talk about Nicea 2. We're not here to talk about that other stuff. So what you actually get there is an admission that, wait, if we actually talk about the specific topic, all of a sudden Roman Catholics are at a disadvantage. What I just gave was a psychological analysis why the historically absent Roman Catholic view even has any appeal, because there's a subliminal appeal culturally because we're a Western society. It's more accessible to people. Now, this could work two ways, and I'll just say this to be nice to the other side, which is so many people will find Orthodoxy more appealing because they're in a society that rejects Roman Catholicism, at least true traditional Roman Catholicism. That's both Roman Catholics, because there's majority of liberal Roman Catholics, and Protestants. And so Orthodoxy's appeal is simply that it's not Roman Catholicism. Now that's bad. I'm not here I don't approve that whatsoever, right? Like you shouldn't be against Roman Catholicism because you're against papacy existing in general, right? Christ here on earth, he's infallible, he's supreme. That shouldn't be aberrant that a human being could be infallible and supreme, because Christ is a human being. Also God, obviously. So Orthodoxy also has certain cultural biases that work in its favor, but that's more not for the historically minded. And so when these debates are about history, if the historical debate is on story arc, that is the battlefield of the Roman Catholics choosing. If the historical debate is on the actual details of a specific event, it's going to be the battlefield of the Orthodox person's choosing. And so the battlefield will determine who wins, right? At least will give you a massive advantage. And I chose what I think was the legitimate battlefield. We're talking about Nicea 2, so the battlefield should be Nicea 2 and people that were directly relevant to Nicea 2, like Charlemagne, for example. or a letter from Pope St. Gelasius that was paraphrased by that council. So right, that would be relevant. But getting to what St. Maximus said and what he recanted or changed his mind in disputation of his day or whatever would be irrelevant in such a discussion. All right. Now, Ephraim says that Reverend Dr. Price makes a very strong case that Latin was read in Nicea II, and we will respond to that in some detail, but not nearly in enough detail, because while they were saying we can't give enough time for this, but no, this happened, and they want to sound like they could talk about it for 2 hours, I wrote a 15,000 word article where if I actually read it, would at least take me 2 hours just to read, and if I were to explain it, would probably at least take another hour and a half. And as we'll show, they simply have not interacted with this in a high enough level where they would be anywhere remotely close to doing that. So that's something to be said about that. So before I would say I move on to some of the things that Reason Theology said in their reply, I want to commend other Orthodox people to become experts on specific fields of church history or the scriptures. So that way they could take Roman Catholics or Protestants onto specific battlefields and win, right? It takes knowing enough about an actual event and the context and reading the primary sources, and then you could win it. There's a certain pride that some apologists have that they have to know everything, and they can't admit the stuff they haven't read or stuff they don't know and things to that effect. And so a big motivation behind me getting to know this was, to be honest, I was not looking to become a manuscript expert or even quasi-online lay expert on Nicea II. That wasn't my intent. I read the council, both the Henry Percival translation, which is truncated, and the Reverend Menham translation, which is complete, which includes notes about differences in Latin, Greek, and all that. And I felt that's sufficient really for my purposes. I'm not God. I don't need to know everything. And so when I made certain comments concerning about the Greek minutes and the Greek minutes being authoritative as to what is read in the council, and this is something that both Percival and Menham were explicit about in their translations, I felt that was sufficient and didn't really look much more into it because, again, not looking to be God. And so I was caught on the back foot when in a recent translation, which I literally purchased maybe a day before the comment was made from Father Richard Price, that in the last 6 years, all of a sudden, this view has changed from two scholars, particularly Price, and he's just copying and endorsing the person who, before it was published, gave him the critical edition of the minutes, Dr. Eric Lambers. And so that got me in the back foot because no one likes looking embarrassed, right? Like, oh, you didn't know what was published 6 years ago? Yeah, there's lots of stuff published in the last 6 years I don't know because I haven't read everything. I'm not God, right? And so it forced me to look more carefully. And what I found was the majority of scholars, and not until like years ago, but like into 1989, and Macaron kept writing to the 1990s, had basically the same basic view. Of course, the Greek was what was read. And so this is the majority view of scholarship, which we'll get into a little bit. And the more I dug into it, and I read both Lambers, which I'm sure they didn't, because Lambers is only in German, but I read both Lambers and Wallach. And I looked into their arguments, having actually read this, right? Actually, I've read Nicea II, actually interacted with the primary sources. I was able to come with a very critical understanding of both their arguments and of the minutes themselves. And so, being that's the case, I felt comfortable writing I would say, pretty good blog post on the issue that's so long, it will only be of interest, really, I think, to historians in their fun time, right? Because I'll say this. I've done actual work in history, stuff that one article is peer reviewed. I've written theses that have had to been like, with archival research and stuff. So I've done real history. I'm not like a real historian. And I wouldn't consider that blog post real history. I consider it good for a blog post, but it's not real history. And so what I mean by not by real history, it's not professional level peer reviewed is my point. And so just because you write some blog posts doesn't mean you've solved all the world's problems. We have to have humility about that. However, it's something that seriously calls into question Dr. Lamber's view. Dr. Lambers is aware of it. He, of course, hasn't changed his mind, but he didn't say I was out of my mind either. And so this is something where I think if people want to get nitty gritty, this is way more nitty gritty than I think most people will be able to actually understand without having probably serious graduate work in the field of history. And so I don't expect that the people, I'll personally be vaguer here, but the people who take issue with the position I'm expounding will really even be able to understand what I'm writing, even if it's not professional history, as in it's not peer reviewed, simply because they're not used to dealing with these sources in that high level. And so if someone could appreciate it, that's great, because obviously it took time to write something that's 15,000 words and to research it and to read with the care that it deserves, Dr. Lambers and Wallach, and of course Nicea too. And so if you want to read it, the link is down there. It's on orthodoxchristiantheology.com. Go and read it. But you'll probably realize, like, wow, this guy's trying to solve every specific issue with these 2 articles, and it'd probably be too detailed for most people. But if you need the detail and you just think I'm bloviating here or whatever, go read it. It's all there. And so I'll put a couple of the comments, and then we will go into some of the video. Hilariously, though, Dr. Price was asked if the East recognized papal supremacy, and he said no. And of course, because he doesn't agree with him. Also, another thing about Father Richard Price is I was told in that interview, and I believe it because I've read Father Richard Price, so it's completely consistent with his published work, said that the theology of venerating saints and venerating icons was a post-apostolic development by centuries, like starting in the 5th century. And so traditionally in Orthodoxy, that's considered blasphemous. So it's very peculiar that in post-trad Roman Catholic apologetics, that Protestant liberalism like shakes hands with when they need it. Ooh, we need reformal councils. So now the councils are historically wrong. And, oh, we weren't really venerating Mary all the time. That was invented later. These are very radical, that real traditional Roman Catholics would never accept this stuff. And I hope to have a show with a real traditional Roman Catholic specifically on this who would take issue with all that stuff. But that wait for another time, and that doesn't undo the brilliance of a translator like Father Richard Price. And you should appreciate his work and appreciate his opinions. And it's something where historically there's some merit to it, though. For those who are wondering, just be aware that we have primary sources from the 4th century that make extremely clear that the vast preponderance of people venerated icons and the saints. So ultimately, Father Richard Price's view is not tenable with the primary sources. And that happens very often because he's not God. He hasn't read everything. You could read St. Epiphanius himself, and he admits that most people venerated icons. So people could say, oh, well, he's forged, but then that means the chief opposition to these veneration practices now disappears. So it's like kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? So let's see. We have the other poll says, learn Greek and Latin, my man, and you could put your head into blah, blah, blah. No, I'm too old. That ain't going to happen, but you can. And that's why I purposely want to do this, because I want other people to start doing this stuff. I want younger, smarter people than me to learn, okay, I've learned from my mistakes, learn to pick the battlefield, learn about the actual events and the primary sources, and don't get into the psychological melodrama of, well, how could we know without a visible principle of unity? How could we have epistemic certainty? How do you explain this whole story arc? Like, that's like comfort pillow stuff, right? We don't need that. What we need is actual facts, what the scriptures really say, and what the actual history demonstrates for us. All right. And and we have a joke here. How can we talk about the Orthodox compiling the Bible when its author's King James? Yeah, there you go. Got me. What are you going to do? So let's share screen for a little bit, and I'll play some stuff and interject, and try to have as much fun with it as it's possible. And just try to be cognizant that all of us are trying to grapple the truth as best we know it, and we're going to have to respectfully disagree. And even when people aren't respectful, we still have to try to respectfully disagree. So that being the case, let's get going.
Frank Truglia. I haven't listened to it, so I can't really know exactly what he said. Feel free.
Well, on the program, he had shown the words of Pope Adrian on a screenshot. And it seems to me the words were absolutely clear as to what they said.
I'm going to bring up. All right, we're back. Sorry about that, guys. So Dr. Lucana said it was absolutely clear what. So Dr. Licata said it was absolutely clear what the Pope Adrian was saying, right? And so it should have been self-evident. And what I was doing was twisting the words and overly interpreting it and stuff like that. And without unpacking, which I wasn't, because I went into the Greek and then I went into what a contemporary, how they understood those same issues. And so I felt I actually explained those things. It was interesting that when Dr. Lakatos was asked, well, how about what Pope St. Gregory the Great said, that there can't be a bishop of bishops or whatever, right? The issue, there can't be a universal bishop. And he's like, well, that's not what he really meant and didn't really mean about Peter. So right now, all of a sudden, the words don't mean what they sound. They don't say, right? They don't mean what they say. So if you're consistent with the principle, then it shows that there is something wrong with your analysis, right? If the things just mean what they say all the time, then you have to stick by that all the time. So interesting point to say about Dr. Lacasse. Now I'm going to try to improve the Wi-Fi. So give me 1 second. All right, hopefully that's better. I sort of doubt it, but what are you going to do? We try our best. It might mess with the house. So anyway, that being said, we have this issue, orthodoxy chloroquine, if I could bring up his response. So the Pope of Rome, supreme infallible, the Vatican itself now acknowledges that the Church of the first millennium did not operate by the principles of the First Vatican Council. So again, yeah, this is pretty mainstream scholarly stuff, and like Father Richard Price says so. So this basic stuff. Albot thinks, did you guys see a bar citing Dr. Price on Pope Adrian's letter to support papal supremacy? Dr. Price literally said that Nicea rejected it outright. Yeah, it's again the post-traditionalists, they put on the clown pope hat when they need it, which is again those liberal arguments where like, oh, even though the Greek says what it says, and if we get into all these alleged reasons, then we can disregard that witness in the historical text. But when they need it, they put on the new Pope hat, and that's why we had that episode on that issue. So anyway, let's continue what's being said here.
Pope Adrian referred to the Petrine text and to his own position as the chief bishop in the church, who had a universal authority over the entire church, both east and west. So I never could understand how such clear words could be misconstrued or interpreted as involving a denial of papal supremacy.
All right, such clear words. But when Pope St. Gregory the Great says there's no universal patriarch, then all of a sudden those words are not so clear anymore. We have to look at other letters of his and understand the context. The correct answer is, so people know, you always try to understand the context. Even if something's clear and agrees with you, that doesn't mean it really does, right? So, of course, we want to understand the context. That's why the battlefield for the Orthodox is the context, is having a good view of a specific event and all the sources connected to it. because that will always work on our side, right? It's kind of intellectually lazy just to pick, well, this clearly says what I want to say, so I agree with it, but this clearly says what I don't want, and so I have to come up with some reason to disagree with it. We should always be trying to understand the context for all these things. And so, yeah, I agree. Very oftentimes people are very selective, right? With Dr. Price, selective citations of Dr. Price and Cornell Bosniak. Then often in the discussion, Dr. Price outright said that multiple ecumenical councils find dogma and historical factual error, and I was shocked. Yeah, it's crazy and it's blasphemous. And to quote Dr. Richard Price himself, that's not what the councils would have said of themselves, right? So it's like he's putting himself above the ecumenical councils. I mean, none of us do that. God have mercy on us. All right. Reminder, I'm Craig's biggest fan. Look at that. I got a biggest fan. If you're my biggest fan, you can go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate and a vote of confidence for the churches in Cambodia. So there you go. Or you can just like me and pray for me. That's good too. So that being said, let's continue with what's being said here, and then we'll skip ahead a little bit.
Which is absurd. So I don't quite understand the reasoning by which he came to that conclusion, because he himself had shown the words of Hadrian. And I don't understand how the clear meaning could be so distorted.
Yeah, we already discussed why clear meaning. Dr. Lucatus was inconsistent with this principle within the same debate, though technically there was some question and answers where he was inconsistent. But that aside, it's for the reason we already said. Charlemagne shows you could say those things and not mean them the way that he clearly thinks they're meant. And in the council, they didn't accept that wording anyway. They accepted the Greek. That's the majority view of scholarship. So I think that might be sufficient for that. I'll see if we'll skip ahead a little bit. So one second.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I haven't read anything by Craig on the topic, and I haven't listened to him. So, but I can tell you what I've seen on.
All right. So usually good not to respond to stuff that you've allegedly not read or saw. So you're actually saying what I'm doing is a straw man, right? If he's even being honest. So it's like he's either dishonest, which is bad, or he's admittedly doing something inappropriate and uncharitable. So I guess take your pick.
On the internet, by the bloggers and discussions I've had in the past is the theory goes like this. Hadrian wrote his letters in 785. And when they reached Constantinople, there was sort of like a prearrangement. The Greeks knew what the Pope's original Latin said, and they just could not tolerate that. They wouldn't allow those claims to authority to be made.
Now, just so you're aware, that's actually not precisely my argument, though such a view would not be illegitimate either. It's a possible view. So I'll just leave it at that. But let's continue.
And so what the idea is that the papal legates and the Tarasius with the Greeks in the either before the council or before the minutes of the second session, they sort of revised it in an agreement with the papal legates, so that way that the papal claims can kind of be taken out and inserted with Orthodox claims.
And again, that is possible, but what I would like to point out is the real point at issue was not claims about the papacy, because no one honestly took that seriously at the time. That's my authentic view I'm expounding. The real issue was complaints over jurisdiction in the Balkans, which interestingly are prominent in the writings of Wallach and Lambers, but wholly absent from the comments of recent theology, which to me is evident that they have not read those texts. they maybe read footnotes in Father Richard Price. And so the real issue was, well, we can't have these complaints about jurisdiction because we're not going to give it to you. that's the real issue. This stuff about these papal honorifics was really an afterthought. Very compelling to me, and I don't have a very good explanation because I have a certain dogmatic bias or presupposition when looking at primary sources, which is I trust the manuscripts as I have them, right? Because it's like the liberal Protestant thing to say, well, the Bible really doesn't say what it originally said, and it was put together over time. There's inconsistencies, blah, blah, blah. And I try to accept every manuscript at face value unless there's overwhelming evidence that that cannot be done. And so being that's the case, I view it that you just look at the Greek. Well, I accept the Latin for what it is and accept the Greek for what it is. But when you look at the Greek actually makes more sense if you read the statement, which I argued during the debate. It talks about the apostles, Peter and Paul. And then it talks says, and here's a proof text. And then in the proof text, the first thing that occurs in the proof text is St. Peter and Paul appear. So if you were writing a statement and then proving it out from an authority like a hagiography, it would make sense that they're consistent, right? So to me, the Greek actually makes more sense. The Latin looks like it might have been doctored at some point. Possibly, keyword is possibly after the Synod of Duzi in 871, and the forger probably would have been Anastasius the librarian, who's an ex-con and a user of forgeries himself, caught red-handed, thanks to the research of Dr. Evangelos Christos. So because that's my opinion, I have to be humble, go, well, that view is not the majority view of scholars. So I will just accept and face value that both the Latin said what it said and the Greek said what it said. But I have to be honest, it does seem that in that one disputed section that the Greek may represent what even the Latin original said, because it'd be very odd for the Latin not to have said that in that one section. And it's possible that maybe a different Latin was made for Latin consumption, because apparently there's a certain way that the Romans and the French spoke to each other, the Carolingians, and another Latin sent to the council. And so that's possible. But again, all this is just high-minded guessing. So a couple comments and we'll keep going. Eric sounds like Carolingian Franks accused the Greeks of removing the filioque clause from the creed. And exactly, it's sort of like, we don't like what your Greek says, so it can't be true, right? And that's really what it sounds like, though. To be fair to Dr. Lambers, Dr. Lambers has his reasons, and I get into minute detail why I believe they're wrong. And quite frankly, there's really no good response to them. Dr. Lambers gets into a lot of detail, and his arguments just don't hold enough weight to overturn the academic consensus on this issue, let alone the view of Anastasius the librarian himself, which gave to Dr. Lambers all of the text he has. And this is what people don't understand, is that the Dr. Lambers and Father Richard Price are actually using sources from an individual and disagreeing with that individual's conclusion of a topic by reading in between the lines of that individual's writings, right? So that individual's conclusions are wrong, according to Dr. Lambers and Father Richard Price. But the inferences we could draw from his works, we could set above his own analysis of the issue, let alone what every scholar said on the issue. So it's actually very peculiar. It only makes sense to the initiated, as I say, to those that understand some of the textual critical arguments made from scholars, but it really doesn't make sense to the uninitiated because it sounds irrational. Right? So because of what this guy said about other stuff, we're going to believe X, but this guy doesn't believe X. He actually explicitly rejects X, right? Doesn't make sense. So anyway, so Al Bosniak says, I thought it was a strong argument that the Greek version is context. Come back. In context, was significantly more coherent. The Latin version feels like a random Vatican I claim thrown in the middle and another thought, and that's very, very true. The Greek does make a lot more sense. But anyway, let's continue.
Like, that, there's basically that all the apostles that all bishops are successors of the apostles, and that it's not just Peter, but it's Paul, in addition, that makes the Roman Church preeminent. And so by adding that Pauline element, it sort of it completely it reformats the cause of primacy completely.
Now, arguably it does, but as I was saying before, arguably the whole point of the passage was really not to even get into that issue, right? So that's also possible as well over the issue of Rome's primacy. So the changes might have not been made for reformatting anything. I mean, it's possible, and if that occurred, it shows the Greeks rejected, right? They obviously rejected what the Pope was trying to do there. But there's a way to kind of harmonize, which is my historical presupposition, what both these sources are doing. And I think the harmony is where the fathers would interpret this history. We have a good question I want to get to real fast, which is there any good books / sources that go through each council in a basic overall historical sense? I guess what I'm asking is, where should I begin? And I hate to say it, but I really don't like anyone in it 100%. There's no one I would endorse 100%. There's historians I like. I like Father Richard Price. I like W.H.M. Clifford, a friend rather, W.H.M. friend. There's historians I read and I enjoy, but when it comes to issue ecumenical councils, it really sounds to me that what's lacking in scholarship is really trying to grapple with these councils in the ways the fathers understood them. So the good thing about Father Richard Price is he's at least transparent with here's how the fathers understood them. So if you could take from Father Richard Price, like you could get a book like Chalcedon in Context and go, all right, this is what they said the fathers really believed about it. And then ignore all the other stuff. They say how the fathers are wrong. Then you could get something good from it. But sadly, there really isn't a good book from it. And there's a lot of people that have not they just haven't read these things in enough detail to really talk about these things intelligently. And that includes a lot of Orthodox. And so if I have any wheelhouse, I'm one of the few guys in the English language who really read all these things, which is why I could speak about these things somewhat coherently, more than a lot of scholars, because there's scholars that will give opinions on these councils without having read them cover to cover. So that's a real problem. So anyway, let's see if I can't remember how long this comment's super relevant, but we'll keep going.
Because if you have a Peter and Paul duo, the logic is that the Petrine exclusivity is not anywhere in sight. And if it was to be anything, then there'd be no reason to add Paul to the picture. And so, I've seen Orthodox use this in order to basically say, look, they knew about the papal claims, but the council they were wheeling and dealing. I think I even heard Craig say that in the past. They were like, well, we'll modify the text so that way it's an agreement with the council and agreement with the Eastern view. And that way we cleanse all of the unacceptable ideas, or possibly maybe not completely unacceptable, but the ones that could be misleading, and replace it with a clear, decentralized, pentarchic, equal Episcopalian view.
All right, and long story short, like mainstream scholarship, like Dr. Christos, acknowledged that there was wheeling and dealing. So this is just not some apologetic I made up and it's winning the internet or something like that. Macaron's argument was this. Christos says this. We see it plainly. It's flat out in one of the letters from Pope St. Hormisdas, where he literally says, say you can't make this change, but if they insist upon it, you could, right? Like, so it's not debatable. We know that this wheeling and dealing occurred in these councils, and we could get more detail of the point, like, well, then exactly what role did that play in the Photian councils and stuff like that? And that's all very interesting. So it's just, we can't minimize that. What I just said is the view of scholarship. This idea that it didn't occur is absurdly naive, It's inconsistent with the primary sources, and scholars don't take it seriously. So I think those of reason theology are beginning to understand the immensity of this, which is why you're not hearing laughing, right? Very different than the Ubi Patris debate recap, is the recap in this debate, because there's not laughing. What I have is very well documented in a 15,000 word blog post. Again, I want to call it a blog post to minimize it. It's not the greatest thing in history, but it's good enough for those who haven't read Lambers and haven't read Price and haven't read Wallach and haven't read Nicea 2 to begin grappling seriously with this issue. All right. So let's continue.
Of the government of the church.
I think you reproduced his argument very well indeed. I think that's
Well, I didn't listen to the
exactly what he was arguing.
Interesting.
But
so
he forgets
it's basically the
some.
old argument. Go ahead.
He forgets. Troglia forgets some very important points. Tertullian had said in the 3rd century, how happy the Church of Rome to have been watered with the blood of both Peter and Paul. And the Roman Church throughout the centuries has always prided itself on,
and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now it gets in this tangent, which again, I want to stick with the actual topic at hand. And so maybe there should be a whole other episode on the roles of Peter and Paul, like we see in St. Irenaeus, like we see, I think it's in St. Cyprian. So we see this in a lot of places. We could get into it, but again, we want to focus on Nicea 2. So anyway, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, I think to minute 34, and it gets into more stuff that's relevant. Hopefully I'm not screwing up. All right, so let's see.
things that Troglia finds it impossible to believe that papal supremacy over the entire church, east and west, was grounded in Holy Scripture and generally confessed throughout the church during the first millennium. Leo the Great, Gregory the Great, Hadrian the First, and even earlier St. Gelasius had the most stunning affirmations of papal supremacy that one can read.
All right, so I'm going to stop there. And the reason why is this. What we want to avoid, and what I purposely avoid debate, was let's go into each and every honorific ever used about the Pope ever, right? We wanted to avoid that. So why did I talk about Pope St. Gelasius, right? Why did I do that? And there was a reason why. Because what Pope St. Gelasius said, and I'm going to have to make sure this thing's plugged in. So I'll take a break in a second when I play the next clip. What Pope St. Gelasius said was actually different in its rationale than what we saw in the extended Latin ending of Pope Adrian's letter to the emperors read in Nicea 2. And so I focus what Pope St. Gelasius said in order to dispute the overall analysis of the shotgunning. Well, there's a million popes that said a million things about how great the Pope is. So I said, well, let's just look at one, just one that's relevant to the council, because the council actually quotes his letter and then kind of twist it. And long story short, Pope St. Gelasius says that Rome has the chief executive role because of the councils, and the actual minutes of Nicea 2, better yet, the extended ending in the Latin, probably wasn't read in Nicea 2, says that Rome has the executive role from a charism from God. And so what we see are two different rationales, two very different rationales. And so you actually can't consistently say, well, what Pope Adrian says is hardly original. It's said by 1,000 guys beforehand. And so I said, well, actually, the one thing in what Pope Adrian's saying that's quoting a previous pope is actually inconsistent with what a pope said beforehand. So if that's true, what else are you wrong about? It's a good question. And so I thought that was worth bringing up. So this is like really low quality recap. So let me double check my power. And you guys start making fun of the other Paul. Read what he wrote there and make fun of him. I'll be right back. All right, I'm charging. So I did something right for once. And people wondering, why is Craig being so calm? I got a kid sleeping upstairs. So anyway, does not Cyprian's conception of all bishops being from Peter, not just Rome, come to play here? Or has that idea been sidelined in this council? Long story short, in Nicea 2, it wasn't sidelined because actually in the Greek letter to the emperors, it says all that inherited the thrones of Peter and Paul. And so if there's other bishops that can inherit the throne of Peter, then clearly that's actually inferred. And so that's ignored a lot in Roman Catholic apologetics, is that we're going to the late 8th century where in a global council, they're taking for granted that other bishops inherited Peter's throne, right? So it's not like just Rome. I think Orthodox overplay this and minimize the things that make Rome and the papacy special. So that is something to take into account anyway. So anyway, I think that's it for that clip. So I'm going to go forward to 3630 because now we're going to see Eric Ybarra trying his best to zing me. And it's not going to work because reading a couple pages from Price's translation, not even reading the whole letter, it appears, is not enough to undo someone who has carefully looked at this and read the scholarship on it. But he's going to try to zing me. So let's have fun with that and take a look at that. So let me move forward to minute 36:30. And we'll see Eric try his best to try to make it look like I don't know what I'm talking about. So let's go.
Here just for a second to show something. So there's a lot of things we could say. We would take hours to talk about this whole idea of the Greek letter, the survived Greek version of the Hadrian's letters. But one of the arguments that Richard Price, who we had earlier on the show, and he takes the position in his book, the Acts of the Second Council of Nicea 787. He follows the scholarship of Eric Lambers and another fellow named Luitpold Wallach. And they both argue pretty convincingly
unconvincingly
that the Greek version that now exists as the purported first letter to Irene and Constantine VI was actually not the version that was read at the council.
And they have the minority view scholarship.
And that the original Latin version that we have is what was originally read at the council.
Unlikely, and the primary sources disagree.
He'll give, we would have to take hours to go through this, but I wanted to share a couple of things here. So let me just share my screen, if you don't mind, Michael.
Yeah.
All right, so Eric's going to go look for that. I'm going to say a couple comments first. And he said, yeah, here Ybarra will cite Dr. Price. Literally after Price totally rejected the idea, then Nicea 2 taught papal supremacy. So yeah, it's again, this like post-traditionalism that there's an expression Zoomers might not know. There's a proverb that we millennials and Xers and boomers know, which is to cut off your nose to spite your face, right? So when a liberal argument somehow undercuts the orthodox, the Greek really didn't say that, we could get into all this hyper-skepticism. They cut off the nose by endorsing Father Richard Price, who then rejects their theses, right? Despite their face. So I just explained the proverb for you Zoomers who I just don't hear young people use that term. So I don't know if they know what it means. But yes, it's cutting off your nose to spite your face. And so, yes, it's very ironic. So anyway, I want to bring this up. It says, I think it's hysterical that the reason theology crew continues to paint truly as irrelevant. And they're clearly interested in what he has to say. Why don't you bar a man up and just debate him? And let me make this very clear. There's a reason why I was taken off the show. I was inconvenient to the narrative they're trying to draw. They cannot name anything I said or did beforehand that was uncharitable or mean or not helpful to them. I was nothing but nice and good to them. And so this continued obsession is because I call into question their narrative, their business model, all these things. And so just because I do, that doesn't automatically make me perfect or great or anything. It just explains their disdain. But as for Eric Ybarra, he's going to try to zing me in a moment. You want the opportunity to respond back? Well, come to this channel. I will debate you. I've been nice to you before. I'll be nice to you again. I'm not going to talk to you on Twitter and Facebook and deal with your ad hominem arguments. But I'll put you in my battlefield, which is talking about the actual issue, remove the whole story arc apologetic away from you, and you know you will lose. And that's why you won't agree to it. And here's another thing we won't have. We won't have a moderator asking you questions during debate, which he admittedly been asking you for years, which you had ready on your screen because you knew he was going to ask you that question again. All right? Or at least it was so obvious that you anticipated it. That was your admission. So we obviously wouldn't allow you to have a moderator who is neutral to have you be asked questions which you had a prepared answer to because you've been asked it for years by his admission. And you had it ready on your screen by your admission. So we wouldn't have that either. What we would have is a fair and honest, good-natured debate on an actual issue. How about this one? And here's the better thing. The better thing is, you know where I'm coming from. There's no fast ones. All my research is published. I guess you'd have to read 15,000 words, and probably you'd have to follow my citations. You'd have to read Wallach and Lambers. You'd actually translate the German because Lambers is only published in German. We're going to get into that in a little bit. So we know you didn't read Lambers. You'd actually have to do all that work. You'd have to go into the battlefield, actually know the content, and then debate the actual facts. We'll see how that work out, right? Wouldn't work out so well now, would it? So that's why this debate will never happen. But I would extend an invitation for Eric to do that because, quite frankly, the facts are solidly against him, and he can't win it. It's like, good old Mike Lofton, his obsession with the letter of Ebus, where he wants to argue that Chalcedon and actually endorsed the letter of Ebus. If you feel so strongly about that, come over here. We can have that discussion. You're not going to win it. You don't know the facts. You're just parroting what everyone else says. The facts aren't on your side. I debate anyone on that issue because the facts are on my side. It doesn't bother me. But that's all pie in the sky. It's not going to happen. And so that is something where the obsession will continue. And thankfully, they're taking it serious, which is why you don't see all the laughing and stuff here. And as we'll get into later, their claims are being modified and changed because it's in response to me. They're publicly being shown to be wrong, so now I have to clarify and modify what they were initially saying. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the zing. Let's get into the zing. All right. So I'm gonna put that back. And I have a crying baby, so maybe we'll have to do part 2. So we'll see.
And then I'll accept it.
Our friend Craig did quote Dr. Price.
Right. And so to be fair to Dr. Lacatus, it's like, wait a second. Craig actually mentioned that Dr. Price talked about this stuff. So I wasn't scotching the issue. I made it very clear in my opening statement that I specifically disagreed with Dr. Father Richard Price and with Dr. Eric Lambers on this point. And I made it clear that they had the minority view of scholarship. So let's continue.
Well, it looks like we're on there you go.
All right. Can you see, you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I don't have the screen.
No, but that's okay, Doctor. I guess maybe afterwards you can see. But what I'm showing here is a footnote from page 148 in Price's book, footnote 27, where he says the following: as Lambers observes, adding that this is a reason for dating this watering down of the papal claims in the Greek text of the letter to the emperors to well after the council, when it was being used as a separate document. For if the change had been made in the first edition of the Acts, it would surely have been made in both letters. In other words, Hadrian sent 2 letters, and both of his letters were read at the council. The first letter is the only Greek version that we have that has the so-called watering down of the papal claims. But the second letter that Hadrian wrote to the council. The Greek version keeps the papal claims without modification.
And I'm going to click pause here. Eric is now making stuff up, and I don't think on purpose. I think he's confused. Lambert's thesis is not that there was two versions in the Greek, one that was originally watered down, sent by the Pope, which is what Eric just said, and then one that is the same as the Latin that I guess was scotched over. Eric Lamberts never makes that point. His point was there was a second round of Photian, it's a conspiracy theory, a second round of Photian forgeries in the 870s. And that's why Anastasius the librarian was unaware that the Greek was lacking this, because the Greek theoretically, according to Dr. Lamberts, there's no primary sources to prove this, but theoretically, according to Dr. Lamberts, lacked deviations of the Latin at the time of 873 when the Latin was translated from the Greek. So that's actually Dr. Lamberts' argument. And that is what Father Richard Price is referring to. And if you read Dr. Lamberts, it'd be crystal clear. But what Eric actually said unintentionally helps me, because what he said inadvertently was that there was an original Greek that was the Greek we have today. And there's then another Greek that agrees with the Latin. And that is not Dr. Lamberts' argument. It'd be a peculiar argument. It'd only help us. It would just show that the Pope made two translations of the Latin, one that agrees with the Greek we have now, which would substantiate the Greek we have now. That is not Dr. Lamberts' point, and it just shows that Eric probably misspoke, or he just fundamentally misunderstands what he's reading. So that being said, let's continue with the zing.
And so I'm going to go over to my screen where I have, let's see, where I have that. Okay, so this you should see later when you see the footage of our video. You should see this part of Hadrian's second letter. This is left intact in the Greek, no modifications. And this is what.
All right, now I'm going to interrupt, and this is, again, maybe unintentionally scotched over, or also possibly Eric fundamentally misunderstanding Dr. Lamberts, because what Eric is reading is not the same letter. It's a second different letter. The first letter, what Dr. Lamberts is talking about, is the letter to the emperors. The letter on page 180 of this translation is the letter to St. Tarisius. And what Eric's about to say, just so you can anticipate it, is that specific letter shows the teaching of papal supremacy. And because it does, it shows, according to Dr. Lamberts, that there was a time where Photius doctored the second letter, and they didn't care about papal supremacy, so they kept that in. But then later in the 870s, again, this is all conspiracy theories from Dr. Lamberts, but later in the 870s, all of a sudden Photius cared, and then he doctored the first letter. But apparently, in doctoring the first letter, he forgot that he should have doctored the second letter. I know that sounds, some people are going to say it sounds stupid, and I don't want to use those words because Dr. Lamberts is very intelligent. He's a very gracious individual, and Dr. Lamberts is smarter than myself and everyone here. But that is Dr. Lamberts' argument, all right? It doesn't withstand scrutiny. It obviously sounds wrong, okay? But that is Dr. Lamberts' argument. But so now that you know that context, let's see the zing. Let's see the attempted zing that, look, papal supremacy right there in the Greek. So let's go.
Hadrian says, may all the weeds be uprooted from the church, and may the word of our Lord Jesus Christ be fulfilled. So he's hearkening back to prophecy and fulfillment, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And further, you are Peter, and on this rock I shall build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. His see, and it's obvious that this means Peter's see. Peter's see shines forth as primatial throughout the whole world, and is the head of all the churches of God. Therefore, the same blessed Peter, the apostle, shepherding the church at the command of the Lord, has left nothing to neglect, but upholds and has always upheld her authority. If your sacredness cleaves to our apostolic see, which is the head of all the churches of God, and endeavors from the depth of your heart and with sincere intention to follow its sacred authority without corruption or pollution. And it goes on and on. But so this is the second letter that Hadrian sent, and the Greek version has this exactly in it. And so you don't have like so the argument that Price, Lamberts, and Wallach are making is if the Greeks were so hell-bent on adding a Pauline element to the first one in order to water it down, to get rid of the pet.
Again, good argument could be made that they weren't looking to water down the papacy. That wasn't the point in the Greek. In fact, the Greek is much more cogent with the point being made than with the Latin. The Latin's like this random thing about this random honorifics that don't prove the point of the paragraph, while the Greek actually is very cogent and internally coherent. But let's continue.
Petrine exclusivity. They would have done that with the second letter, but they didn't. So that's one clear, I think, a supportive case for why the different Greek version that we have today dates after the council. Now, is it necessarily Photius who did it? I don't know. It's possible. I'm not exactly convinced by Wallach's argument there. I'm not convinced by Lambert's either.
All right. First comment. What a beautiful family William Albrecht has, and God bless him. I just love when I see kids. You have your own kids, you understand. So very cute thing, photobomb there. It's like when I had my wife on the other day, the cat photobombed. But yeah, so that was really cute. Second comment would be Eric Yabaris being quite magnanimous and seemingly even-handed. He's like saying, I don't fully agree with Wallach. I don't fully agree with Lamberts. Now, granted, you could easily read Wallach because he's on JSTOR and anyone could get a JSTOR account. But I very much doubt he's read Lamberts because he writes in German. So I very much doubt he's read Lamberts. And he's probably going secondhand from Father Richard Price's footnotes and my blog post because I quote Lamberts in English translation. So people would have access to at least some things that he's written. And so there's that. So I find it sort of like, well, it's nice that you sound like you're being even-handed, but I very much doubt you've read Lamberts. But that aside, let's actually read the section that he's talking about in the Greek. All right, page 179 it starts at, right? He doesn't do that. He starts right at 180, but starts at 179. And remember, this is a letter not to the emperors or to the whole council. It was read to the whole council, but this was a letter directed to St. Tarisius, to the Bishop of Constantinople. Now, if anyone remembers the Council of Hiera, which was the pro-iconoclast council, was a council that effectively only represented Constantinople. Okay? It didn't represent Jerusalem and Antioch, or Rome for that matter. And so that was one of the big discredits to this council, was that it didn't. And so Constantinople, a big egg in their face for this. And so Tarisius is writing to Constantinople in response to this issue, and Tarisius showing that he's going to play ball with Rome and get on board the icons. And so when I'm going to read now, may your sacredness eagerly propose to the same most pious triumphant emperors, the first of all pseudo-assembly, right? So your sacredness would be Tarisius, all right? Sacred assembly would be Hiera. So now let's go right back to the beginning. May your sacredness eagerly propose to the same most pious and triumphant emperors, so please tell the emperors this, that first of all, the pseudo-assembly, Hiera, that took place contrary to order and reason and without the apostolic see, or Jerusalem or whatever, these other guys for that matter, but without Rome, in opposition to the tradition of the most venerable fathers, right? Because tradition is Rome has legates at councils, all right? And against the divine images, be anathematized in the presence of our apraecustiari. I'm guessing that's just a Latin word for legate, so I'm not a Latin expert, but in the presence of people that come from us, our apostoliari, all right? May all the weeds be uprooted from the church. What church? He's talking about the whole church, right? Because he's saying there's this council, talk about this. He's not saying my church, because he's clearly speaking about, right? He said our apostoliari, so he doesn't say may all the weeds be uprooted from our church, from the church, from the whole church. And may the word of the Lord Jesus Christ be fulfilled, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That means the whole church, right? And further, you are Peter, and on this rock I shall build my church. Again, the whole church. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. His see, right now he's returning back to Rome. I agree with Eric. Shines forth as primatial throughout the world and is the head of all the churches of God. Therefore, the same blessed Peter the apostle, shepherding the church at the command of the Lord, has left nothing to neglect, but upholds and has always upheld her authority. So, right, he's saying her authority is the church. Rome is upholding the church. Rome is not being used synonymously with the church. And it misapprehend this whole passage. Right? So this passage isn't specifically teaching what is found in the first letter. This is something that's overstated by Dr. Lambers. This is something that's obviously overstated by Eric's reiteration. I could quote monophysite sources in Schism calling Peter the bishop of the bishops. Right? So simply saying that doesn't mean that Rome has supremacy, that Rome has infallibility, that the proof text, Matthew 16:18, which in the council's use of the whole church, and that the church bind and loose sins, is specific only to Peter, because that's actually not the point. The point is, in short, just to sum it up, that St. Tiresias ought to confess what's appropriate, because in the past, Constantinople didn't, so that the church could uphold the truth, means everyone, including you, Tiresias, all right, and do so to our apostoliari, or however you pronounce it, because Rome has always guided the church. Rome has always been her spiritual head. That's the point. Now, I mean, there's probably some hyper-conciliar Orthodox that take issue with that. But again, there's monophysites in Schism that didn't take issue with this idea. All right. So when you read it and you understand that in context and you actually read the paragraph, what it actually attaches to in the Greek, it's not radical. It's not radical. And I think Dr. Lambros pushes too far. And if you want more details, it's a 15,000 word article on it. And I talk about that issue in far more detail. Now, I think that's really all the zing there. I'll play a little more because I can't remember. And then we'll play one last comment and I will take questions from people. So if you guys have questions, ask. I've been taking comments and playing them in between. Like Al Bosniak says, but the underlying obsession with the language is itself the problem. Even if the language does seem to support the position, the actions of the council and other councils did not. Yeah, if you noticed in the debate with Dr. Lucanus, he never responded to why did Rome emphatically ask for jurisdiction in the Balkans and only in the Latin letters, by the way. Why did they do that if everyone acknowledged their supremacy? It would have already been theirs, right? So they ignore it. Why does the council define what makes an ecumenical council the assent of the Eastern churches, but merely the cooperation of Rome? Why does it do that? It's inconsistent with Vatican I. Again, no answer. So that's why I won the debate. I said actually what the council really taught, contrary to papal supremacy, it's very clear. And all, sadly for Dr. Lucanus, all he had was what a questionable Latin rendering said that the council didn't accept. And so obviously he came out losing when the debate is strictly on Nicea too, because the evidence is just overwhelmingly against that. So let's continue that clip like I was saying, but we might be done with what's good with it, but let's try.
That is necessarily Photius. So Wallach and Lambert's, they're not compelling in everything they say, but
you haven't read what Lambert said,
probably
probably.
In that the Greek original of Hadrian's first letter was matching the Latin version that we have today. And then the second thing I would say is even the Greek version of Hadrian's letter, the survived Greek version, the revised one, even that one has claims to papal supremacy. I argue in an article that I've written recently
it doesn't for reasons
adding Paul doesn't do any harm to the papal claims. we have appeals to Peter and Paul all the way up to the present day by the popes in their writings. So it doesn't really, in other words, just because there's an appeal to both Peter and Paul doesn't mean that the unique privileges that Peter was given is somehow now recontextualized so that it's a duo, and that.
All right. And so again, straw man, if you said you never watched the debate, then why are you giving this very specific response and what's specifically wrong about it? But you didn't watch it, right? So that wouldn't be very charitable. So that's something to point out. And the other issue is the problem is in the Greek, it says that all who inherit their thrones. And so that means it's not just Rome. It's those who inherit the thrones of St. Peter and Paul. So it includes the other bishops. So again, that undercuts this idea that the Greek is not at all damaging to Roman presuppositions, right? If all you had was the Greek, you couldn't come to these conclusions about the papacy. And as I pointed out, even with the Latin, if we read the Latin according to how contemporaries read that same Latin, you still couldn't come to those conclusions. And we got this little point. Do you think more manuscripts show us something new, like a later Chalcedon showed Latin corrupted them? I don't think we're getting new manuscripts of this stuff at this point. So my answer would be no. What I would love, here's my dream, somewhere in the desert, the beginning of the Second Constitutum will reappear, right? Because if the letter to, I forget the name of I think Eutychius of Constantinople was super embarrassing, and Vigilius admitted to like Satan deceiving him and deceiving him through the people around him, then what on earth did the Second Constitutum, which was even like more nauseatingly submissive, what did that admit to in the beginning? Who knows? The beginning's missing. So it would be great if it would take us like one beginning of a manuscript to be unearthed, but even it's very unlikely at this point, but it'd be nice if it did. That's why you got to learn Ge'ez and go to Ethiopia, start finding manuscripts. You might not find that, but we'll find other interesting things. So anyway, let's share again and see if there's anything else. But I think that's it from that clip.
That, the whole idea of the Petrine individuation of Vatican I is somehow depleted from the intention of the text. So, I mean, we could go on and on and on, but I think that your point is made, and your argument is left standing in my eyes.
And I think to anyone who's watched the debate, they know that's what they would call popularly cope. Clearly that's not the case. The content of Nicea 2 clearly doesn't allow for the sort of interpretation that the post-traditionalists are attempting. So I'm going to skip forward one more time. All right. Minute 48:40, and just get into why you just can't trust what people have to say. They could be lying, or they just could be just always wrong, but you can't trust what they have to say because they're too consistently wrong. All right, so I'm going to play this clip, and here we go.
Fantastic the way Eric shared the images. And by the way, after the show is over, we'll go ahead and I'll send you the link. You can go back and you can check that out. You can check the show out. I'm glad he did that to show. I think the one thing that I would really double down on, and I want to be clear for the audience, I have not heard the debate. I haven't heard of the debate. I heard a little portion of it.
I haven't heard it. I didn't hear it. I heard a little bit. Okay. All right, I just found that funny. Let's continue.
And I think Eric brings up a very good point, and you do as well. Your argument seems to have not been understood properly, does still stand. And of the point that Eric has brought up a number of times, and I'd like to really emphasize it even more so, is that even if it was the Greek version that was read, it does no favor for the claims that are being made by the Eastern side. It does no favor at all.
I think anyone who's read the Greek would disagree with that, as would Macaron, who was the most recent scholar to put forward the thesis and reiterate the thesis that the Greek was the result of wheeling dealing the council and toning down papal claims over jurisdiction and stuff. So it's I just think knowledgeable people would disagree with that statement. So let's continue.
So I think your argument still does stand, and I think
Are we
that
making a point here?
you are in line with the majority of scholarship when in the arguments you make when it comes to
In line with the majority of scholarship. In line with the majority of scholarship. Now, I'm going to share something. I've shared it once before. We'll get back to that one. But I'm going to share a statement from William Albrecht. And here's what he said. And there's no room for misunderstanding what he said. And I'm just going to make sure people could see it okay. I'm going to make it big. All right. Nice and big. This is William Albrecht. Here's what he says. No one argues, no one, all capitals, argues that the Latin is not representative of the original. Not, period. One, period. Byzantine, period. Scholar, period. This includes non-Catholics. I think Price is the only Catholic of the Byzantine scholars that have examined it. All right, we just talked about Lambers and Wallach right now. It's clear he hasn't read this stuff. Context is a killer. This is the original. Anastasius gives the original Latin. Now, I know most Eastern Orthodox do not know who Anastasius is, but he is a very important figure. It was read aloud in Latin and Greek. Now, I'm going to keep that up, but make it a little smaller so you can see my face. I won't make that joke. All right. So we just said, you said the majority of scholarship. So that's a clarification of this absurdly extreme statement, which not, period, one, period, Byzantine, period, scholar, period. Now, let's just name a few. We got Menham, we got Percival, who both are explicit in their translations. The Greek is what was read in the council. We have Ostrogowski, we got Mikel, we got Macaron, all right? Those are three additional scholars. Ostrogowski is Orthodox. Macaron is Roman Catholic. Percival and Menham are Protestants. All right. I don't know what Mikel is. I believe he's French. He'd almost certainly be Roman Catholic. And there's a sixth guy. I forget his name at the top of my head. Let me see if I'll find it real fast, I believe, just so we don't leave anyone out. Levison. All right. And I don't know what Levison's background is. He might even be German. I don't know. Not sure. So, okay. So I just named 6 scholars. Now let's name the scholars that are opposed to the view that the Greek was what was read in the council. Price. All right. That's right when this was made. Lambers, because Price is using Lambers' critical edition and agrees with him, right? They're contemporaries. And Wallach. And Wallach was publishing before Macaron was publishing on this topic. So the people who agree with me outnumber the people that agree with William Albrecht. Not only is William Albrecht just factually inaccurate, you're looking right here, right? Just making stuff up that he shouldn't say. It's just not true, right? It's just not true. And it's not the majority of scholarship. The majority of scholarship agrees with me. I'm just reiterating what people pretty much have always felt. And you know who also agrees with me that context is a killer? Anastasius the librarian. Anastasius the librarian is explicit that the Greek was what was read out of the council to quote him in, come on, it's getting late, in consideration to Tiresias. That's what Anastasius says. And so I think that pretty much settles it. And there's also, like I said, a 10th century Vatican gloss of a letter from Pope Nicholas that talks about this whole episode and likewise says that the Greek was what was read in the council. Okay, so I think that pretty much settles that. I mean, it's just, why do people look to people that are just wrong? And it's not like just me calling them wrong, calling them a jerk or something. They're documented. They're wrong in a documented sense. There's zero doubt, right? There's zero doubt that they're wrong. So maybe you need to look into someone else than someone that's continually wrong and it's to continually re-clarify what they have to say, right? So I think that might be as much as he has to say that is any good, but I will try to see if there's a little more, and then we'll get into our final audience questions and call it a day. So let's see. Share here. and I'll keep going for a little bit.
To Pope Hadrian when it comes to Nicaea too. But another point that you brought up, and I've noticed that unfortunately your interlocutors have never really been able to deal with. I've never, even one time, seen any of them be able to deal with Scripture.
All right. Well, didn't he just say you only saw a small piece of this? So how do you know this is true? But let's, I guess, why let that get in the way of a good story arc, right? That Orthodox are just not spiritual people and they don't read the Bible. All right. So let's see where this goes.
Funny enough, I see them play fast and loose with history, but I never.
Now, fast and loose would be talk about Nicaea too, but then non sequiturs in 1,000 different eras of history, while being honest and pointed with the history and focused would be focusing specifically on Nicaea too, which is what I did. So again, an unfair critique.
Able to notice that they can deal with any of the Scripture. Matthew 16, the Lucan passage, the Gospel of John, Acts. I've never seen them be able to sufficiently deal with any of them. I have seen them brush them to the side as if they don't exist, as if you cannot make a strong case for the papacy from the Bible, which you can, as we've shown multiple times here in the show. We've had years.
All right, blah blah blah. All right, so I'm done with that. And so, in response to that, Ubi Patchers has one with good old Codex Justianus, and they go into that. But if you actually listen to the debate, I talked about Matthew 16, 18. I made explicit that the council applied it to the whole church, right? So I did talk about Matthew 16, 18. And on topic, I talked about how the council treated it. So wouldn't that be appropriate in a debate about Nicaea too, right? How the council interpreted Matthew 16, 18. So I think so. Another issue is I actually quoted other scriptures. I cited Acts chapter 15, 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Peter 2 and 3, Ephesians 5. I thought I went into considerable amount of detail on the issue of consent and how ecumenicity works during that show. I think that might have been in one of the questions. But this sort of assertion that the Orthodox are afraid to deal with the Bible is two things. One, it's inaccurate and or dishonest, clearly. And second, it shows it's an implicit acknowledgement. The guys at Reason Theology know that their side lost this debate, and they don't have it in them to take up the war of letters and actually start writing against my article, because that would require them to read the actual article, which they're not going to do because it's too long for them to read. They're not going to read Lambert's because he's in German, and they're probably not even going to know how to find a German article. They're not going to get into this sort of work. Maybe they'll start with Wallach, and I'll do you the favor. It's on JSTOR, so you can find it very easily and download the PDF. So they might get started, but just Wallach has got a lot missing. You really got to understand Lambert's if you're going to at least try to intelligently defend that position. And so because they've lost the historical argument, the assertion from Albrecht is that, well, because they have to do it because they don't know the Bible. But my argument is you lose the biblical argument. In fact, I made that argument during the actual the debate show, but I think it was in the question and answer session. But I did talk about the scriptures, and I did talk about how the council treated Matthew 6 and 18. And my esteemed opponent, Dr. Lukautis, he's the one, which I think I'm pronouncing wrong, so please forgive me. He's the one who actually never answered that point. So if anyone's ignoring the scriptures, it would be my opponent, not me. So that is my thing on that. So guys, this is your time for questions and comments. I will make this point before getting to some audience questions and comments, which is, I think this is a big win. I think it demonstrates the principle that if Orthodox fight on their battlefields, which is the truth, not the story arc, which is dealing with the facts and the facts in context and the facts in detail, we won't lose debates. And we can't lose debates if we do that because we're right. So there's a certain sort of confidence about that. I'm not one of those people that just choose debates where I think I'll automatically win. For example, the debate I had on the historicity of Marian veneration with Turretin fan, that's actually hard to historically prove out, right? Orthodox accept the tradition of the church, but if you're not Orthodox, that's not very compelling. In fact, post-traditionalists and reason theology kind of nod their heads, allegedly, because I didn't watch it, when Father Richard Price, because I know he talks about icons being a development, but when other Roman Catholic scholars will say, well, all these things are developments. They didn't originally exist. So they will accept that, but they won't accept what the actual facts of the actual council will say, right? They have this story arc and they want to stick with the story arc, and anything that's inconvenient to the story arc somehow is disallowed, and whatever is, whether it's liberal, whether it's from hyper-skeptical sources, and whether it's ultra-traditional, it's this mishmash and they'll put it all together. It's schizophrenic, it's eternally schizophrenic, but that's what they do. So if Orthodox don't allow for that eternal schizophrenia and instead go, let's deal with the facts, we could deal with those other things one at a time, but we're dealing with this. We gotta talk about what this really says, then we won't lose a debate. And so I want to encourage people to become apologists, to focus on a specific topic, learn the context, learn it in detail, and then drive home the point on that, right? And then you will do well for the church if you're interested in apologetics. And ultimately, hopefully someone reads all the ecumenical councils and could do what I do better, right? Just take what I've done and improve upon it, which shouldn't be hard. All right, and so we have some questions and comments, which is, let's see. Wow, he hasn't watched the debate either. How can people take these guys seriously? Yeah, it seems very interesting that they pretty much made 2 response videos for something they didn't watch. I think just like I was caught on the back foot when they got into the details of Price's view, because I didn't own Price's book at that time. They were caught on the back foot that there was a cogent response to it and in a lot of detail. They just weren't prepared for it. So that's my opinion too. Bosniak said there's an example of the Pope deposing on Patriarch Constantinople in the 6th scenarion. And I'm not sure which one you're specifically talking about, but for example, in 535, there was a heretical Patriarch Constantinople tried to make a communion with the Miaphysites, and then the Pope at the time, whose name is escaping me at the moment, please forgive me, he ordained with Justinian's support a new Patriarch Constantinople who undid that. So I'm not sure if that is what we're talking about. And yes, there was a synod. There was a synod in 536, and all these things are done synodically, not single-handedly. Let's see. Gladys Bob. Is this academic Power Rangers where the one with the more and those more beautiful colors win? LOL. I'm glad he brought that up, because I actually don't like the argument that my scholars outnumber theirs. Right? Because that's an appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy. And so I will use that in response to Albrecht, who said not one, period one, Byzantine period, scholar period, right? Because it shows just how utterly foolish that claim is. But in reality, the facts should decide things, right? It kind of is irrelevant that you have scholars agree with not. If you go in the debate, well, no one agrees with you. You go, cool story, bro, but what could you show? You're appealing to other people. What could you show that this is untrue? Well, I just don't believe you. All right, well, that sounds like an argument you'd have with your wife, but it's not very compelling YouTube, right? It's hyper-emotionalism, and I think we need to be a little more manful than that. Craig, let's go to the Vatican Library and see who's lying. There's guys that actually get into manuscripts and find the word filioque and stuff added to it, but like I said, that's not going to be me. I'm not going to learn the original languages. I'm too old. And so I kind of work with a presupposition, which is not always right. I accept the authenticity of pretty much all the manuscripts unless there's something just too much evidence, too absurd to accept that it's legitimate. Bosniak says, Catholics frequently point to language showing that the Pope is supreme hierarch and has authority over the other individual hierarchs, our bishop of the world. Couldn't we grant that to them if the Pope is Orthodox? Isn't the real issue that the idea that the Pope is authority of the collective church as a body, whether Orthodox or not? And I have an article. I have a video on Matthew 16:18 and Orthodox interpretation, right? Because supposedly we don't ever deal with the scriptures. But long story short, yes, the Pope means Father, right? It means pretty much Holy Father. And so the Pope was the father to the other bishops. He is the bishop to the other bishops. This is Orthodox. Orthodox sources do teach this. That just does not entail all this other stuff. In fact, they would have to prove that it does. And I think when people say something heterodox, such as, there was no Pope, or the Pope doesn't have any prerogatives or canonical prerogatives, that's just fundamentally dishonest and inaccurate. And so that's why, like, a lot of people thought I was this like liberal or ecumenist because I'd go and reason theology and say this, right? But it's true. So that is the point. The Sexnarian makes it sound that the Pope was invited to Constantinople by the emperor to depose the patriarch. To depose him, he held a synod to replace him. Yeah, so I think that's that episode in 535, 536. All right, so you guys could look that up if you want more detail on that episode. Jeremiah. Wow, read St. John Chrysostom and Reason and Theology. Dozens of Orthodox have dealt with this. Mind-boggling, they pretend this has not been covered. Disingenuous is correct, Craig. Again, I think they're really trying. I think there's one individual who just flat out lies. I think there's another individual who has no idea what he's talking about. And then there's another individual who really tries to read some of this, but he hasn't read enough. And I think he's somewhat humbled, and so he was more tempered in his claims this time. And I think that's good. Craig, they don't want to go to 900, 965 period, the popes, the reign of prostitutes. You have the pornocracy, but I don't think that really affects anything crucial on these like apologetic debate issues. But there's also not a ton translated from that. It's not an issue that's terribly important to people. So it would be interesting. But I would guess that even during the pornocracy, they had guys just like Anastasia Librarian that were doing the same sort of stuff. So that'd be my guess, but I don't know. If you want to know, it's Lucudis. Yes, Lucudis, because he told me in the beginning and I forgot because I'm an idiot. So there you go. Need to debate one point at a time, not let them overflow your assertions, right? Because like, remember when Eric Ybarra and Jay Dyer had that kind of like shout fest? Ybarra was really slow and Dyer was all over the place, beep, 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 like 1,000 different things. And I believe, if I remember right, if you watch their review of that, they called it a debate, but that argument, they said, well, Dyer was never making a point. He's equivocating and saying a million different things. Well, all right. So just like when Lucudis says, Lucudis says, well, words clearly mean what they mean, other than when they disagree with me, right? Like when St. Gregory the Great says that there's no universal bishop, then this is sort of similar. Craig didn't address these 1,000 points, so it shows somehow he's like afraid or something. Though they never really said that, but you get the point. It's like he never addressed your overall argument. But yeah, then you could say, well, then Ybarra never addressed Dyer's overall argument. So what is it then, right? I don't like the inconsistency. Let's see. Where are we going? Craig, you're also missing. Hadrian never thought he was above the emperor. Look at Vigilius and Justinian. Yes, Christos says that this idea that the Pope is superior to the emperor is actually an innovation and totally unprecedented, and it started with Anastasius the Librarian, Pope Nicholas. Just so you know, that's what the scholarship's saying. And you made a point earlier, Buckled Crane, about what the Council of Nicea II said about Honorius, and it said that he taught heresy. So it's not that, Honorius wasn't really a heretic because he just didn't, in a muscular enough fashion, denounce monothelitism. Nicea II says he taught, quotation marks, taught monothelitism. So we must take that into account with Nicea II, especially if the context of the debate is whether Nicea II taught papal supremacy. Here's a good question from Elijah. What do you think Lucudis' strongest point was in your debate? I actually kind of have to dig deep down in this because Lucudis made the mistake of approaching going with the multifaceted approach. And I think I cut that to the knees right off the bat when I refocused it on Nicea II. And so I'm trying to think of a specific point. Oh, he made a quote. He read a quote, and I didn't have the time to talk about it, or I forgot to respond to it. about the Byzantine emperor writing back to the Pope and calling him the Holy Father and the head of the churches, right? So at least that's a point that's kind of consistent with his story arc, and which was actually stated during the debate. For the reason I already stated, though, it's the Pope is called Pope for a reason, just like the Pope of Alexandria. Pope does mean father, so there is a spiritual sense. He's a Pope. He's a spiritual father to all the other bishops. In fact, there's a good article from Metropolitan Hiethros of Nantakos, or however you say it, and he gives like a play-by-play of the Council of Constantinople 4/879-880, and there's this interaction between the papal legate and Saint Photius, and pretty much the legate's like, I'm just paraphrasing, will you submit yourself to your Holy Father in Rome who knows all? And the Photius is like, of course, we would always want to be, with warm, cordial relations with our most Holy Father, our brother bishop, right? So like we could say he's like a Holy Father and he's the lead, but then you minimize it, but he's our brother, right? He's this honorific, but he's still one of these. And so this would be very obvious because the emperors didn't give the Pope what he's asking for. They didn't give him jurisdiction in the Balkans. So I think that was, it was Lukautus's best point, but there's a good answer to it. Maybe I should have said it. I felt that I made so many points for the Nicea too that were so powerful that I think most people don't even notice that. Probably me just saying this now. People are like, oh, I didn't even realize he said that. So, but I do think that was his best point during the debate. Let's see. Michael of St. Joseph. There is a true factual objective reality, but personally having the proper perspective, interpretation of worldview is impossible outside the church. Yes, I think there's a certain spiritual oppression that those outside the church deal with when grappling with this stuff. And so we have to have compassion for that. And let's give them credit. There was really no laughing. I mean, I saw like one attempted chuckle. There was no laughing. There was no wind in their sails after the Ubi Petrus one, because Ubi played on the battlefield of Lukautus. He let Lukautus fire his volleys from his battlefield instead of drawing him to the Orthodox battlefield. The wind was in the post-traditionalist sails, and so they were super happy after. They were not happy after this debate, which is very clear. And it seems to me they brought some big guns in trying to bring Father Richard Price on. But I want to be honest, I didn't listen to that yet, so I'll reserve judgment and apologize if I'm applying that wrongly. Let's see. Other Paul. How appeals to scholars always devolve. I'm right. Why? Because the scholars say so. Well, these other scholars disagree, but they're wrong. Why? Because they're wrong. There you go. I think the other Paul could be on reason and theology. I think there's a good post-trad in you. You won't be Protestant long. There's a good post-trad in you. Don't give up on yourself. There you go. So true. So true. I would give the dates to the next time, but feel like recent theology would run wild with it. Yeah, let him read it. Just like with Lambers, it's like if you put enough effort into it, you could find the German article and you could get it translated. But I'm not going to make it easy for them. I have it in English, but I'm not going to make it easy for anyone. They could go do it the hard way, like I had to. Let's see. How about I dare Bishop Enoch to say they corrupted manuscripts to Yabara. Again, we don't want to make everything corruption of manuscripts because, again, I consider that a hyper-liberal argument. I personally don't like those arguments. Lukautus said his arguments: St. Maximus, St. Leo, Pope Filioque, body without a head, Constantinople Moscow Schism, Immaculate Conception, Nazareth, etc., etc. Yeah, like, again, where's Nicea 2 in these things? And we could talk about each of those things. I have something on Filioque. We talked about Pope Adrian. St. Maximus, I have an home. Well, I actually didn't cover that as much. It's more Ubi Patchers, and he also covered the Pope Leo thing. Body without a head, I covered in one of the question and answers. Constantinople Moscow Schism about unity, I covered with the Malaysian Schism. Immaculate Conception, I covered in, I think, more than any other pop apologist online. National churches, I don't see how that's an issue. There's the Uniates within the Roman Catholic Communion, so, and they're more hyper nationalistic, by the way. I mean, that's pretty much the only thing that keeps them going. Let's see. They're trying to get Al Bosniak on Discord. And there you go. So I think that's everything. So then, guys, has this blessed you, or has the debate blessed you? So please go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. It's there. It's going. orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. You don't want to miss this out. Come on. It's your opportunity to help grow the parishes in Cambodia, to do something positive, right? I didn't put half the debate behind a paywall. I don't do any of that stuff. I make the stuff publicly available to you. So please go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate, and you could help the churches in Cambodia. All right. So think about that, but you could also support. You could support someone like Ubi Petros, who's making good quality, high production stuff that helps convert people to faith. So support someone like him. Support a local monastery. Pray for us. Pray for the guys in Reason Theology, though I don't recommend you giving them money. If this has blessed you, bless someone else, and God will bless you. All right. And so, but please think of those churches in Cambodia. They're very dear to my heart. And so Bosniak says, this was very well done. I don't think they'll be able to ignore this. Prepare for a comedy hour. I really hope not, for the sake of everyone's families involved. Such a thing is excessively immoral. It's bad for Christians and for the faith, and may God have mercy on them for what they've already done, and may they not do such a thing. But yeah, it's like Craig is nothing worth responding to, so we're just gonna make fun of him and chop clips up and stuff. And then the tone here is much different, and I think it's people are starting to pay attention, and I think they're realizing, may God convert at least one of them to orthodoxy, whether to return to the church or go to the church, because there's a real difference in tone. I've not heard this with anything else that another Orthodox apologist has done. So it's pretty humbling. But again, it's not because I'm great. It's because I focused on one thing, right? On one strong thing that is unassailable, right? You go with the story arc, the emotions take over. They're going to go with the heart. But it's kind of hard to go with your heart where you're just focusing on, this is the historical facts. And you already know you're getting desperate where you're like, well, the manuscripts aren't real. And there's these conspiracy theories say they're not real. And that justifies how my heart feels. So I'm going to go with that. It just sounds wrong. People know it sounds wrong. It feels wrong. You can't be saying, oh, the liberal critics of the scriptures are wrong, but then all of a sudden use these skeptical arguments to try to buttress your feel-good stuff. It's not going to work. Though I didn't like how they were denouncing first John 5:7, saying it wasn't original to the scriptures when it's quoted by St. Cyprian. So it's like, St. Ambrose even says it was the Arians that removed it from the scriptures. So we got a 3rd and 4th century source from really important people that talk about this. And so the post-trads are just devolving into clown pope liberalism. It's very sad to see. And so I think that's why it's I think post-tradism, I'm not a prophet, but I think it leads to atheism or Protestantism. And unless someone denounces its way of thinking, maybe they could go to orthodoxy. But if one follows the epistemology, it's atheism or Protestantism, because you can't really consistently be Roman Catholic in such a way of thinking. We have good point and focusing on a single issue. A lot of other debaters get caught up in tangent details, common mistake. And I make that common mistake. Why? Because it's fun. I want to talk about everything, right? I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't find it generally interesting. And there's this fine line to walk where you want to cover everything, but also you want to be edifying to the audience. And I feel with Dr. Lukudis, I wanted to make very clear that if you look at Nicea 2 specifically, because I put a lot of work into looking at Nicea 2, the Orthodox point of view is unassailable. And this will be a black hole for them if they pursue this. I'm going to be like Yoda. Don't go to Cloud City. You won't like what you find. The more they dig into this, they're going to find it's going to just work against them in every angle. So they're probably best just leaving it aside and not pursuing it. I hope they do pursue it because, again, it's like to use a World War II example, the Germans are going to attack the Kursk salient. And so the Russians made it full of multiple defense lines and minefields and reserves and so it was just a death trap for the Germans. And then the German position collapsed after they destroyed their best forces attacking the Kursk salient. So it's sort of like, come into my salient, come into Nicea 2, get into the detail, because you're going to waste a ton of time. You're going to get chewed up. You're not going to prove that I was dishonest with the sources or the quotations, because I wasn't. It's not going to end well for you. So I really hope that they do, but I'd like to think they're too smart and they're just not going to. It's easier just to make it up. Say, I didn't watch it, but he probably said this, and admittedly make a straw man, which again, it shows to you the low quality of the content that they produce. God bless them for their production value. God bless them for their good guests, but low quality content. It doesn't represent them intellectually in a very positive light. And so I will end it there. Guys, thank you for watching. I don't know why on earth this had more live viewers than the debate with Lycurgus himself, who did an admirable job. I hope to have him back on and maybe talk about some of those other things. But to be honest, I won't be as strong in them because I can't become an expert the same amount of specificity on the textual critical arguments of like every single thing that every single pope ever did, because I'm not God. But it's worth saying, and I don't mind letting someone else have the floor and be vindicated to some extent. So it was fun. God bless you guys. Pray for me, and I'll end the show as I end all of them. Fight to death for the truth. The Lord God will fight for you, as Jesus Rock says. God bless you all. Have a great day.